shout out video. Whoever like my status. And I'll just be giving shout outs once I'm done. Shout out to Devin Harvey. Shout out to TC of the Model. Shout out to YMCMB Mooka. Shout out to Jamar Lee Taylor Gang. Shout out to Angelia Ramirez. Shout out to J Money Eason. Shout out to my nigga Renzo Mitchell. Shout out to Rue As Mo. Shout out to Yasmin Yakira. Shout out to Kayla Renee. Shout out to J Jones Beaston. Shout out to Sade Simpson. Shout out to Demaria Allen. Shout out to Garrett Lockhart. Shout out to Javion McGriff. Shout out to DeAndre Firebomb Green. Shout out to Anthony All-Star Polk. Shout out to Vanshayla Hampton. Shout out to Lexis Brown. Shout out to Allie Barrington. Shout out to Maya Barbieface McIntyre. I don't know where these Barbies come from. Shout out to Justin Maynard. Shout out to Jalen Goandi, One Balin. Shout out to Deasia, the Freak Warner. Shout out to Shout out to Soraya Monreal. Oh. Shout out to LaDeja Jackson. Shout out to Chris Griffin. Shout out to my sister Crystal Brown. Shout out to J.R. Hill. Shout out to Jerome Tanner Jones. Shout out to Minnie Pretty as Fuck. Shout out to Deonda Hill. Shout out to Brittany Gilliam. Shout out to Erin He's Famous Johnson. Shout out to Tayliana Carter. Shout out to Alexis Jones. Shout out to Ronald Quick. Shout out to Mick Taking Care Miller. Shout out to Lex Avery. Shout out to Tanisha Somerville. Shout out to Jaquan Snoddy. Shout out to Secure Rich Girl Wilson. Shout out to Cookies J Fincero. Shout out to Kiki Just Bad Johnson. Shout out to my nigga Desmond Johnson. Shout out to Brandy Neal. Shout out to Maya Thomas, love your sister. Shout out to Tanisha Kamen. Shout out to Tiara Brown. Shout out to Amber Thug Diamond O'Neal. Shout out to my mom just texted me. Shout out to Kia Sweetheart Hills. Shout out to Anthony Davis. Shout out to Nisha Starling. Shout out to A-Dub. Shout out to Kiana Williams. Shout out to Ashley Janae. Shout out to Deja Robinson. Shout out to Ema Knight. Shout out to TK. Shout out to Imani Johnson. Shout out to Nana Robinson. Okay. Shout out to Darius Adams. Shout out to Chris Harrison. Shout out to Nisi Renee. Shout out to Dion James. Shout out to Adam Newton Friend Thompson. Shout out to Jasmine. Don't give a care. Taylor. Shout out to Zakira Wall. Shout out to Shannon Smith. Shout out to Shauna Tiff. Shout out to Urban Phillip, Nadia Jones. Shout out to Kiasha Troel. Shout out to Nelson Simmons. Shout out to Chris Autumn. Shout out to Keyshawn Mag. Shout out to Carissa Jackson. Andrea Jackson. Shout out to Ashley Clemens. Shout out to my nigga Deja Hardy. Shantanice Daniels. Shout out to T Robinson. Shout out to Markin CA. Shout out to Brandon Malik Wilkes. Shout out to Bree President. Shout out to Jazz Problem.
Jasmine.
No, baby, move. Shout out to Pace. Jamaya Pace. Shout out to Javante, so dope. Godfrey. Oh, Jesus.
Vante.
You don't know it. Shout out to me. Shoot. Being
Who
the
you?
boss I am.
Who you?
Yes, baby, to me. Shout out to my sister, Takia Williams, my best friend. Shout out to Ronisha Sharp, Risha. Shout out to
Forward.
Dennis. Shout out to Zakaria McCurdy. I'm just saying people's names who are on my news feed right now. Shout out to Kenzie Hansford. Shout out to, I don't know. Shout out to Latte Holmes. Shout out to Shamari Peoples. Shout out to Envy So Homo.
No, we got you.
Shout out to Veta Evans. Shout out to,
They come about 10 minutes.
shout out to my daddy. And shout out to my mama, bitch.